You trusted someone completely, shared your ambitions and vulnerabilities, only to watch them use that information to undermine you when it served their interests. Every betrayal leaves you questioning your judgment, wondering if you're too naive for this world, while others seem to navigate relationships with calculated precision that protects them from such devastating disappointments. I am Niccolò Machiavelli, the man who spent my life studying power, human nature, and the dangerous art of trust in a world where loyalty is often a luxury few can afford. What I discovered about discerning true character from clever facades will transform how you evaluate people, giving you the wisdom to build alliances with those worthy of your trust, while protecting yourself from those who would exploit your good faith. The same principles that helped me survive the treacherous politics of Renaissance Italy can help you navigate the complex web of modern relationships and professional alliances. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless wisdom on human nature, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world needs to learn the art of strategic trust. My education in the treacherous art of human nature began not in any university, but in the marble halls and shadowed corners of Renaissance Florence, where I learned that survival depended on reading faces as carefully as reading books. Born in 1469 to a family of modest means, my father Bernardo was a lawyer of limited success. My mother Bartolomea came from minor nobility, found myself positioned perfectly to observe without being observed, to listen without being heard. The letter of betrayal that shaped my understanding arrived when I was still young, watching my father receive news that a trusted colleague had sold information about our family's financial struggles to political enemies. I saw my father's face crumble as he read those carefully crafted words, and I understood for the first time that people could smile at your table while sharpening knives behind your back. Florence, in my youth, was a city where allegiances shifted like morning mist. The Medici family had been exiled, and the Republic struggled under the fervent preaching of Girolamo Savonarola, that Dominican friar who promised salvation through severity. I watched citizens who had privately mocked his sermons publicly burn their mirrors, paintings, and books in his bonfire of the vanities. The same merchants who contributed their wealth to his cause would later cheer as he burned at the stake when political winds changed. This taught me my first crucial lesson about trust. People will abandon their deepest convictions when fear or opportunity demands it. The very citizens who had sworn eternal loyalty to Savonarola's vision became his executioners when the Pope threatened Florence with economic ruin. I learned to distinguish between those who held principles and those who merely wore them like fashionable clothes, discarding them when styles changed. My family's modest position became my greatest advantage in this education. We were neither wealthy enough to be envied nor poor enough to be dismissed. I could move through different social circles, observing the calculating merchants in the markets, the scheming nobles in their palazzos, the desperate artisans in their workshops. Each group revealed different aspects of human nature under pressure. I remember watching Lorenzo de' Medici's son, Giovanni, later Pope Leo X, even as a young cardinal, how he could make each person in a room feel like his closest confidant while revealing nothing genuine about himself. He had mastered the art of strategic intimacy, making others feel trusted, while never truly trusting anyone himself. This became my template for understanding how dangerous the charming and charismatic could be. The political turmoil of my youth showed me that in times of crisis, people's true characters emerge like wine stains under pressure. Some revealed nobility and courage, others exposed selfishness and cowardice. I began keeping mental notes who spoke truth to power when it mattered, who changed their stories based on their audience, who could be counted on when the stakes were real rather than theoretical. By the time I reached manhood, I had witnessed enough betrayals, reversals, and revelations to understand that trusting the wrong person wasn't just disappointing, it could be deadly. The streets of Florence had become my university, and human nature my primary curriculum. When I was appointed second chancellor of the Florentine Republic in 1498, at the age of 29, I thought I understood human nature. I was wrong. The diplomatic correspondence collection from those years reveals how proximity to power strips away every pretense and shows you the raw machinery of human ambition. Power doesn't corrupt people, it reveals who they always were beneath their carefully constructed facades. My office in the Palazzo Vecchio became a theater where I watched the same men who preached virtue in public practice vice in private. I maintained correspondence with kings, princes, and republics across Europe, and each letter taught me something new about the masks people wear. The French would promise military support while secretly negotiating with our enemies. The Spanish would offer trade agreements while planning our economic destruction. Everyone spoke of honor while pursuing only advantage, but it was Cesare Borgia who gave me my most profound education in the relationship between charisma and trustworthiness. I spent time with him during my diplomatic missions, studying this man who could inspire absolute devotion while feeling none himself. Cesare possessed that dangerous combination of intelligence, ambition, and complete absence of conscience that makes certain people irresistibly attractive and utterly untrustworthy. I watched him charm hardened soldiers into laying down their lives for him, not through loyalty to a cause, but through sheer force of personality. He could make each person feel chosen, special, important while viewing them all as expendable pieces in his grand design. Cesare taught me that the most dangerous people are often the most compelling ones, because they understand exactly what you want to hear and have no moral constraints against saying it. The correspondence from this period shows pattern after pattern of betrayal disguised as friendship. Allies would send warm letters expressing eternal brotherhood, while simultaneously writing to our enemies, offering to sell us out. I learned to read between the lines, to notice when someone's actions diverged from their words, to pay attention to who they were when they thought no one important was watching. What struck me most forcefully was how power attracted the very people least suited to wield it. Those who desperately wanted authority were often those who would abuse it most cruelly. The men who spoke most passionately about serving the people were usually those most eager to exploit them. I began to understand that the hunger for power and the capacity for trustworthy leadership were often inversely related. My position also showed me how quickly alliances could shift based on changing circumstances. Today's enemy could become tomorrow's ally, and yesterday's friend might be plotting your destruction. This wasn't necessarily personal, it was simply the logic of survival in a world where weakness meant death and strength demanded constant vigilance. I developed what I called the proximity test. The closer someone came to real power, the more their true character revealed itself. Some grew more magnanimous and wise, but far more became petty, paranoid, and cruel. The key was identifying which type of person you were dealing with before trusting them with anything that mattered. These years taught me that in politics, as in life, the most important skill isn't making friends, it's distinguishing between genuine allies and skilled manipulators. The difference could mean the survival or destruction of everything you held dear. Through years of diplomatic negotiations and political maneuvering, I developed what I called my character assessment manual, mental catalogue of signs that reveal the difference between authentic emotion and calculated performance. The ability to read people accurately became not just useful, but essential for survival in a world where the wrong assessment could cost you everything. I learned to watch people's eyes when they spoke about their convictions. Those who believed what they said maintained steady eye contact, not because they were trying to convince you, but because they were drawing from genuine conviction. The manipulators, however, had eyes that searched your face constantly, looking for signs of whether their performance was working. They were less interested in expressing truth than engaging your reaction to their words. Flattery became my most reliable detector of untrustworthiness. Genuine compliments were specific, unexpected, and often focused on character rather than achievement. But dangerous flattery followed predictable patterns. It was excessive, generic, and always seemed to want something in return. I noticed that those who flattered me most elaborately were often those planning to betray me most thoroughly. The way people spoke about absent friends revealed their true nature more than anything they said directly to me. Those who gossiped maliciously about others in private would inevitably speak the same way about me when I wasn't present. Conversely, those who spoke respectfully of absent friends, even when acknowledging their flaws, proved themselves worthy of confidence. I paid careful attention to how people responded to others' success. The trustworthy felt genuine pleasure in their friends' achievements, while the dangerous revealed subtle resentment or tried to diminish others' accomplishments. This single test eliminated more potential allies than any other. The inability to celebrate others' good fortune revealed a character poisoned by envy. To sustain genuine loyalty, body language spoke volumes that words tried to conceal. Those telling the truth sat naturally, without theatrical gestures or defensive postures. Liars often overcompensated with excessive animation or unnaturally rigid stillness. I learned to notice when someone's physical presence contradicted their verbal message, when their body betrayed what their mouth was trying to hide. The difference between confidence and arrogance became crucial in assessing potential allies. Confident people acknowledged their limitations and showed curiosity about others' perspectives. They could admit mistakes without losing their essential self. Arrogant people, however, needed to be right about everything and viewed others' successes as threats to their own superiority. I discovered that the most revealing moments came during interruptions or unexpected questions. Prepared liars could deliver their rehearsed speeches convincingly, but spontaneous responses revealed their true thoughts. I began deliberately asking unexpected questions or creating small interruptions to see how people responded when their careful scripts were disrupted. Perhaps most importantly, I learned to trust my instinctive reactions while remaining curious about why I felt them. When something felt wrong about a person, I didn't dismiss that feeling, but I also didn't act on it immediately. Instead, I gathered more information to understand whether my instincts were revealing genuine danger or merely reflecting my own biases and fears. My relationship with Piero Soderini, the gonfalonier of the Florentine Republic, taught me one of my most painful lessons about trust. Sometimes, the people who mean you no harm can be more dangerous than your declared enemies. The Soderini papers from this period document how good intentions without strength create instability that destroys everyone it touches. Soderini was everything you would want in a leader: on paper honest, well-intentioned, committed to Republican principles, and genuinely concerned about the welfare of Florence. He promoted me, trusted my counsel, and shared my vision of a strong, independent city-state. For 14 years, I served him loyally, believing that virtue and good intentions would ultimately triumph over the cynical maneuvering of our enemies. I was catastrophically wrong. Soderini's fundamental weakness wasn't moral corruption, was his inability to recognize that noble intentions, without the power to enforce them, become liabilities. He refused to take decisive action against threats because such action seemed to contradict his principles. He wouldn't eliminate enemies when he had the chance because he believed in redemption and forgiveness. He trusted in the goodness of others even when they repeatedly demonstrated their willingness to destroy him. I watched him ignore intelligence about plots against the Republic because acting on such information would require methods he found distasteful. He knew the Medici were planning their return and had the opportunity to prevent it, but he couldn't bring himself to use the necessary force. His weakness wasn't lack of knowledge, it was lack of will to act on what he knew. The tragedy was that his indecision didn't preserve his moral purity. It simply ensured that more ruthless people would make the crucial decisions for him. When the Medici finally returned to power in 1512, they swept away not just Soderini, but everyone associated with him, including me. His refusal to be strong enough to protect his allies meant that his enemies destroyed us all. This taught me that trusting weak leaders, however well-intentioned, is a form of slow suicide. They cannot protect themselves, which means they cannot protect you. Their moral scruples, admirable in peaceful times, become everyone's death sentence when facing enemies who share no such constraints. I learned to evaluate potential allies not just on their intentions, but on their capacity to follow through on commitments. The most dangerous position is being associated with someone who has enemies but lacks the strength to defeat them. You become a target without gaining the protection that should come with alliance. Soderini's downfall also showed me why weak leaders often make everyone around them vulnerable through their very virtues. He attracted followers by appealing to their better nature, but he couldn't shield them from those who operated according to baser instincts. His goodness became a liability that destroyed good people. I realized that sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is distance yourself from leaders who cannot defend their own position. Loyalty to failing leadership doesn't honor their principles, simply multiplies their casualties when the inevitable collapse comes. When the Medici returned to power in 1512, I discovered the harsh truth about friendship that comfortable times never reveal. My prison writings from those dark months contain poems and thoughts that show how crisis strips away every pretense and reveals the authentic character hidden beneath layers of social convention and mutual advantage. The accusations came swiftly against the new Medici government, plotting revolution, dangerous Republican sympathies. Within days, I found myself in the Stinch prison, subjected to the strappado torture, where they tied my hands behind my back and hoisted me by a rope, dropping me repeatedly to dislocate my shoulders. The physical pain was excruciating, but the emotional revelation was worse. Watching which of my supposed friends disappeared like smoke when association with me became dangerous. Men who had shared my table, laughed at my jokes, and sworn eternal brotherhood suddenly developed convenient amnesia about our friendship. Former colleagues crossed streets to avoid acknowledging me. Political allies who had praised my service to the Republic now spoke of me as if I had always been suspect, always been dangerous. The speed with which they rewrote history to exclude our friendship taught me how superficial most human connections really are. But adversity also revealed authentic friends whose loyalty survived when it could no longer benefit them. Francesco Vittori, despite his own precarious position with the new regime, continued our correspondence and even visited me in exile. He risked his own safety to maintain our friendship when doing so offered no advantage and considerable danger. This taught me the difference between friends of circumstance and friends of character. My time in prison forced me to confront my own character under extreme pressure. I had always prided myself on my strategic thinking and emotional control, but torture and isolation tested every assumption I had about my own strength. I discovered reserves of endurance I didn't know I possessed, but I also faced moments of despair that showed me my own vulnerabilities. The loneliness was perhaps worse than the physical suffering. I had spent my adult life surrounded by colleagues, diplomats, and political actors. Suddenly, I faced endless days with only my thoughts for company. This solitude forced me to distinguish between relationships that had been genuinely meaningful and those that had merely filled time or served convenience. I wrote letters to friends that were never sent, imagining conversations with people who were now forbidden to acknowledge my existence. Through this mental exercise, I realized how much of my sense of self had depended on external validation and social connection. Prison taught me to find strength in my own convictions rather than in others' approval. When I was finally released and exiled to my small farm outside Florence, I had to rebuild my understanding of human relationships from the ground up. I could no longer afford the luxury of casual friendship or the illusion that shared interests created genuine bonds. Every relationship now required careful evaluation. What did this person want from me? What could I expect from them? And what would happen if circumstances changed? The exile experience taught me that crisis is not just a test of others' loyalty, it's a revelation of your own worthiness of loyalty. I had to ask myself honest questions about whether I had been the kind of friend to others that I now desperately needed them to be to me. Had I stood by others when their fortunes fell, or had I, too, practiced the convenient amnesia I now condemned? This period of isolation and reflection transformed my understanding of trust from a hopeful assumption into an earned privilege. True friendship, I learned, is not tested by prosperity but by adversity, and the friends worth having are those whose loyalty survives when loyalty becomes costly. During my exile, when political isolation forced me to transform observation into wisdom, I wrote what would become my most controversial work, The Prince. The original manuscript, annotated with my personal notes about real people who inspired each principle, reveals the moral complexity I grappled with when analyzing the relationship between deception and leadership. I wrote The Prince not to celebrate treachery, but to acknowledge the brutal reality that those who refuse to understand deception will inevitably become its victims. My years in government had shown me that while we might wish for a world where honesty always triumphs, we must navigate the world as it actually exists, one where good people often finish last because they refuse to recognize evil in others. The most misunderstood aspect of my work is the distinction between personal relationships and political alliances. In intimate friendships and family bonds, I believe authenticity and vulnerability create the strongest connections. But in the arena of power, whether political or professional, different rules apply. Here, those who reveal all their cards first usually lose, not because deception is good, but because predators specifically target the naive and trusting. I learned to distinguish between lies that serve the greater good versus those that serve only selfish advantage. When I advised rulers to break promises that would harm their people, I wasn't advocating casual dishonesty, was acknowledging that sometimes protecting the innocent requires disappointing the powerful. The key is understanding when deception serves a purpose larger than personal gain. This principle extends beyond politics into everyday relationships. Sometimes protecting someone you love requires withholding painful truths that would serve no constructive purpose. Sometimes achieving goals that benefit many requires strategic silence about your full intentions. The moral question isn't whether deception ever occurs, but whether it serves noble or selfish ends. I observed that the most dangerous people are those who use moral language to disguise immoral purposes. They speak constantly of virtue, principles, and higher purposes, while pursuing only personal advantage. These individuals are far more destructive than honest villains because they recruit others' good intentions to serve their bad ones. Conversely, I've known leaders who occasionally used strategic deception but remained fundamentally trustworthy because their ultimate purposes were honorable. They might mislead enemies to protect allies or withhold information to prevent panic, but their core commitments remained solid. Learning to recognize this distinction became crucial for my survival. The Prince taught me that understanding the capacity for deception doesn't require practicing it constantly. It requires recognizing when others are using it against you. The goal isn't to become manipulative, but to avoid being manipulated. You must understand the game well enough to protect yourself, even if you choose to play it more honorably than others. My most important insight was that naive goodness often enables the very evil it claims to oppose. By refusing to acknowledge how manipulation works, good people become unwitting accomplices to bad ones. They create power vacuums that ruthless individuals eagerly fill, then express shock when their noble intentions produce terrible outcomes. The challenge for trustworthy people isn't learning to lie. Better, it's learning to recognize lies more quickly. You must become sophisticated enough to identify deception without becoming cynical enough to assume everyone is deceiving you. This balance requires constant calibration and represents perhaps the most difficult aspect of navigating human relationships. Successfully, my marriage to Marietta Corsini in 1502 taught me that the trust required in intimate relationships operates by completely different rules than political alliances. The letters to Marietta Corsini from our years together reveal the vulnerability required for authentic love and how that vulnerability can become either your greatest strength or your most dangerous weakness. Marietta came from a respectable Florentine family, and our marriage began as a practical arrangement typical of our social class. But over time, it evolved into something deeper that challenged every strategic instinct I had developed about relationships. Where political alliances required constant evaluation and adjustment, marriage demanded a leap of faith that could either create profound security or devastating betrayal. The domestic sphere required me to lower defenses I had spent years constructing. With Marietta, I had to share not just my public successes and failures, but my private fears, doubts, and vulnerabilities. This level of openness, essential for genuine intimacy, violated every principle of strategic self-protection I had learned. Yet without it, our marriage would have remained merely a legal contract rather than a true partnership. Political instability made this vulnerability especially challenging. During my imprisonment and exile, Marietta faced social ostracism and financial hardship because of her association with me. Her loyalty during this period, when abandoning me would have been both understandable and advantageous, proved that domestic trust can survive tests that destroy political alliances. I learned that romantic love requires a different kind of trust calculation than friendship or professional relationships. With Marietta, I had to trust not just her intentions, but her capacity to remain committed when our relationship became costly rather than beneficial. This meant evaluating not just her character, but her courage and resilience under pressure. Our correspondence reveals the constant tension between my strategic mind and my emotional needs. I found myself analyzing Marietta's words and actions through the same lens I used for diplomatic negotiations, then feeling guilty for bringing such calculation into our intimate connection. Learning to distinguish between healthy discernment and destructive suspicion became a constant challenge. Parenthood added another layer of complexity to domestic trust. We had to trust each other, not just with our own welfare, but with our children's future. This created a shared vulnerability that bonded us more deeply than any political alliance ever could. We both had something precious to lose, which made betrayal not just personally devastating, but generationally destructive. I discovered that successful marriage requires balancing vulnerability with wisdom. You must open yourself to genuine connection, while maintaining enough awareness to recognize if that trust is being abused. This isn't about being strategic with your spouse, it's about being honest about whether your spouse deserves the extraordinary privilege of your complete trust. The domestic realm taught me that while political relationships could be rebuilt after betrayal, intimate relationships rarely survive such breaches. The stakes are simultaneously lower. Known nations fall when marriages fail, and higher, because the personal devastation cuts deeper than any political defeat. Ultimately, I learned that the capacity for intimate trust and strategic thinking aren't contradictory, they're complementary skills that protect different aspects of a complete life. After my return from exile, I discovered an unexpected sanctuary in the gardens of the Ruscelli family, where Florence's finest minds gathered for what we called the Orti Oracellari Circle. The garden dialogues from these meetings represent some of my most intellectually honest conversations, and they taught me how shared ideas create bonds deeper than shared interests or mutual advantage. The Ruscelli Gardens became a refuge where we could discuss philosophy, politics, and literature without the constant calculation required in formal political settings. Here, I met men like Zanobi Buondelmonti, Luigi Alamani, and other young intellectuals who valued ideas for their own sake rather than for their utility in advancing personal ambitions. These gatherings revealed a crucial distinction I had missed in my earlier political career: the difference between those who challenge you and those who merely flatter you. In government, I had grown accustomed to people who either agreed with everything I said or opposed me for strategic reasons. In the gardens, I encountered something rarer: individuals who disagreed with my ideas while respecting my intellect, who could argue passionately without becoming personal enemies. I discovered that intellectual honesty is one of the most reliable predictors of personal integrity. Those who could acknowledge the weaknesses in their own arguments and the strengths in opposing views demonstrated a relationship with truth that extended beyond academic debates. They approached all relationships, personal, professional, and political, with the same commitment to accuracy over advantage. The conversations in those gardens taught me to distinguish between ego-driven debate and genuine inquiry. When someone argues to win rather than to understand, they reveal a character that will prioritize personal victory over shared truth in all their relationships. But when someone can say, "I hadn't considered that perspective," or "You've identified a flaw in my reasoning," they demonstrate the intellectual humility that makes deep trust possible. I found that the rarest treasure in human relationships is friends who can disagree with you without betraying you. Most people either avoid conflict entirely, which prevents genuine connection, or turn disagreement into personal warfare, which destroys relationships. The men in our circle had learned to maintain affection while disputing ideas, to preserve friendship while challenging assumptions. These intellectual friendships also provided something I hadn't found in political alliances: relationships that improved with depth rather than deteriorating under scrutiny. The more we shared our real thoughts and concerns, the stronger our bonds became. This contrasted sharply with political relationships, where increased intimacy often revealed incompatible interests and competing loyalties. I realized that shared pursuit of truth creates more durable connections than shared pursuit of advantage. When people unite around ideas rather than interests, their relationships can survive changing circumstances because their fundamental purpose remains constant. Political alliances dissolve when interests diverge, but intellectual friendships endure as long as both parties remain committed to understanding. The garden conversations taught me that the capacity for intellectual friendship, the ability to engage with ideas honestly and to maintain personal affection despite ideological differences, perhaps the strongest indicator of someone's worthiness for any kind of trust. If they can disagree with your thoughts without attacking your character, they can probably navigate the complexities of genuine relationship. Becoming a father forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth about trust. I had to teach my children how to navigate relationships wisely while ensuring they didn't inherit my cynicism. The letters to my children contain my attempts to pass on hard-won wisdom about evaluating character without destroying their capacity for genuine connection. My son Bernardo and my other children represented both my greatest vulnerability and my highest responsibility. I had to prepare them for a world where trust could be weaponized against them, while preserving their ability to form the meaningful relationships that make life worth living. This required a delicate balance I had never achieved in my own life. I taught taught them to observe people's actions over their words, but also to remember that good people sometimes struggle to express themselves clearly. I wanted them to notice patterns of behavior rather than isolated incidents, how someone treats waiters, servants, and those who can't benefit them often reveals more about their character than how they treat peers and superiors. The challenge was helping them develop discernment without becoming suspicious of everyone they met. I had seen too many people become so guarded against betrayal that they never experienced genuine intimacy. I wanted my children to be strategic without becoming calculating, wise without becoming cynical. I emphasized the importance of building their own character first. The best protection against untrustworthy people isn't becoming untrustworthy yourself, it's becoming so reliable that you attract other reliable people. Like coals to like in human relationships, and the quality of your character determines the quality of people drawn to you. I taught them that breaking cycles of betrayal starts with personal integrity. If they wanted others to keep their word, they had to be scrupulous about keeping their own. If they wanted others to be honest with them, they had to practice honesty even when it was costly. The golden rule applied to trust: treat others as trustworthy until they prove otherwise. But don't be naive about the proof when it appears. Perhaps most importantly, I tried to model the kind of person worthy of their trust. I wanted them to see what authentic relationship looked like, even if my own political experiences had taught me caution. They needed to understand that the skills required for survival in power weren't the same skills required for happiness. In family life, I realized that my greatest legacy wouldn't be my political writings or diplomatic achievements. It would be whether my children could form healthy relationships. Despite growing up with a father who would learn to question everyone's motives, I had to teach them wisdom while protecting their capacity for love, prepare them for betrayal while preserving their ability to trust. The success of this balance would determine not just their happiness, but the continuation of genuine human connection through future generations. Florence's position as a center of commerce provided me with countless opportunities to observe how business relationships reveal character patterns that extend far beyond financial transactions. The Florentine trade records from this period show how commercial interactions often predict behavior in all other relationships. Financial integrity and personal integrity usually rise or fall together. I learned that people who cheat in small transactions will inevitably betray you in larger ones. The merchant who shortchanges customers on small purchases has already demonstrated the character that will lead him to break major contracts when the stakes are higher. The businessman who lies about delivery dates or product quality has revealed a relationship with truth that will poison every interaction. Conversely, I discovered that those who honor agreements, even when circumstances make them disadvantageous, possess the kind of character that makes genuine partnership possible. The trader who fulfills contracts despite market changes that make them unprofitable demonstrates reliability that extends beyond commerce into every aspect of life. I observed how financial pressure reveals authentic character more clearly than almost any other test. When money becomes scarce, people's true priorities emerge. Some maintain their integrity even at personal cost, while others abandon every principle for temporary advantage. The way someone handles financial desperation predicts how they'll handle every other kind of pressure. The importance of reputation in commercial relationships taught me valuable lessons about long-term thinking in all human connections. Successful merchants understood that their reputation was worth more than any single profitable transaction. They would take losses on individual deals to maintain relationships that generated profits over years or decades. This principle applied beyond commerce. People worth trusting think in terms of relationships rather than transactions. They consider how their actions will affect ongoing connections rather than just immediate benefits. They understand that burning bridges for short-term gain usually leads to long-term isolation. I noticed that the most successful traders were also the most careful about choosing business partners. They would rather do fewer deals with reliable people than more deals with questionable ones. This taught me that selectivity in relationships isn't antisocial, it's essential for building the kind of network that can survive changing circumstances. Business relationships also revealed how shared risk creates stronger bonds than shared profit. Merchants who weathered crises together often became lifelong allies, while those who only worked together during prosperous times frequently abandoned each other when difficulties arose. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that building commercial reputation required the same consistency demanded in personal relationships: keeping your word, delivering what you promise, and maintaining the same standards, regardless of whether anyone is watching. The merchants who thrived over decades were those who understood that trust, once lost, is almost impossible to rebuild in any context. My relationship with faith and the Catholic Church taught me perhaps the most complex lessons about trust, as I learned to distinguish between genuine spiritual conviction and religious performance designed to manipulate others. My personal prayer book, annotated with reflections on faith, doubt, and divine guidance, reveals the struggle to find authentic spiritual counsel in a world where religion often served political purposes. Growing up in Renaissance Italy meant navigating the landscape where the church wielded enormous temporal power alongside its spiritual authority. I witnessed popes who lived like kings, priests who sold salvation, and religious leaders who used moral language to justify immoral actions. This forced me to separate the message from the messengers, to find authentic faith despite the corruption of many who claimed to represent it. I learned to distinguish between those whose faith informed their character and those who used religion as a mask for salvation. Genuinely religious people demonstrated their convictions through consistent behavior. They were honest in small matters, generous without expecting recognition, and humble about their own righteousness. Those who performed religion for social advantage spoke constantly of virtue while practicing vice, loudly proclaimed their piety while quietly pursuing profit. The dangerous ones were those who weaponized religion to control others. They used guilt, fear, and claims of divine authority to manipulate people into serving their personal agenda. They spoke with absolute certainty about God's will when it coincided with their own interests. But somehow God's will became flexible when it conflicted with their desires. I found that authentic spiritual conviction actually made people more trustworthy, because it provided them with moral standards independent of social pressure or personal advantage. Those with genuine faith had principles that didn't shift with circumstances. They remained honest even when lies would profit them, remained kind even when cruelty would serve them. However, I also learned to be cautious of those whose religious certainty made them inflexible or judgmental. Some people used their faith as an excuse to avoid the complex moral reasoning that real relationships require. They preferred simple rules to difficult discernment, absolute answers to nuanced questions. The most trustworthy religious people I encountered were those who combined deep conviction with intellectual humility. They held firm principles while remaining open to different perspectives. They could disagree with your beliefs while respecting your humanity. They understood that genuine faith should make them better people, not superior people. My own spiritual journey taught me that the capacity for authentic relationship with the divine often predicted the capacity for authentic relationship with others. Those who approached God with honesty, humility, and genuine seeking usually brought the same qualities to their human relationships. Conversely, those who tried to manipulate or bargain with God often treated people the same way. Faith, I discovered, could either deepen someone's capacity for trust or provide new tools for deception. The difference lay in whether their spirituality served ego or transcended it. My work creating Florence's citizen militia taught me that the ultimate test of trust occurs when lives hang in the balance. The militia ordinances I drafted weren't just military reforms, they were experiments in building relationships strong enough to survive mortal danger. When I organized ordinary citizens into soldiers, I discovered truths about human loyalty that no amount of political theory could have taught me. The most profound lesson came from understanding why mercenaries cannot be trusted with your survival. These professional soldiers were skilled, experienced, and motivated by clear financial incentives. Yet they repeatedly proved unreliable in crucial moments because their commitment was transactional rather than personal. When better offers appeared, or when battles became too costly, they simply abandoned their employers. Their expertise meant nothing without genuine investment in the outcome. This taught me to distinguish between hired loyalty and earned loyalty in all relationships. People who support you only because you pay them, whether literally or through favors, connections, or other benefits, will abandon you the moment someone offers them a better deal. True allies are those who share your interests, values, or affections to such a degree that your success becomes personally important to them. Creating our citizen militia forced me to understand how shared danger creates the strongest possible bonds between people. When citizens fought to protect their own families, neighborhoods, and way of life, they demonstrated courage and commitment that no amount of money could buy. They would die for each other not because of contracts or commands, but because they genuinely cared about each other's survival. I learned to identify the difference between professional soldiers and hired opportunists through their behavior during training and preparation. True soldiers focused on the mission and their comrades' welfare. They shared resources, covered each other's weaknesses, and took pride in collective achievement. Opportunists focused only on personal advantage. They hoarded resources, avoided dangerous assignments, and took credit for others' successes. The militia experience taught me when to trust your life to others, and when to rely only on yourself. You can trust people who have something real to lose if you fail their own lives, their families' safety, their communities' survival. You cannot trust those who can walk away from failure without consequences, regardless of how skilled or experienced they might be. I discovered that combat reveals character more quickly and completely than any other experience. Under life or death pressure, people cannot maintain facades or pretenses. Their true nature emerges. Some become heroes, others cowards. Some become selfless, others selfish. The man who shares his last piece of bread with a wounded comrade will be reliable in every other circumstance. The one who abandons his post to save himself will betray you in any situation where his comfort conflicts with his duty. The most valuable insight was understanding that military thinking applies to all high-stakes relationships. Whether you're building a business, raising a family, or pursuing any important goal, you need people who will stand with you when the situation becomes difficult. Fair-weather friends and sunshine patriots are worse than useless. They consume resources during good times and disappear when you need them most. I learned to apply the foxhole test to all potential allies. Would I trust this person to watch my back in a life or death situation? If the answer was no, then I couldn't trust them with anything that truly mattered. If the answer was yes, then I had found someone worth investing in for the long term. Military alliances also taught me that trust must be mutual to be reliable. The soldiers who trusted their officers were those whose officers had proven worthy of that trust through competence, fairness, and genuine concern for their welfare. Leadership based on fear or authority alone crumbled under pressure, while leadership based on earned respect endured through the worst circumstances. Ultimately, My military experience showed me that the strongest relationships are forged in adversity and tested by crisis. The people worth trusting are those who choose to stand with you, not because it's easy or profitable, but because they believe in you and what you represent together. The most difficult lessons I learned about trust involved understanding when to forgive betrayal and when to maintain permanent distance. The reconciliation letters from my later years document attempts to rebuild relationships with former enemies who became essential allies, teaching me that forgiveness can be both a powerful strategy and a dangerous vulnerability. My relationship with Francesco Guicciardini exemplifies this complexity. We had been on opposite sides during the Medici Restoration, and his actions contributed to my exile and disgrace. Yet years later, we found ourselves working together again, and I had to decide whether our shared intellectual interests could overcome our political history. I learned to distinguish between genuine repentance and calculated apologies. Guicciardini never apologized for his actions. Instead, he acknowledged them as necessary choices given the circumstances, while demonstrating through subsequent behavior that he respected my abilities and valued my counsel. This honesty about past conflicts, combined with present reliability, proved more trustworthy than elaborate expressions of regret would have been. The key was understanding that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and rebuilding trust doesn't mean returning to previous levels of intimacy. I could work with Guicciardini effectively while maintaining appropriate caution about the limits of our relationship. He had proven himself capable of prioritizing political advantage over personal loyalty, so I never again trusted him with information that could be used against me if our interests diverged. I developed what I called calibrated trust, adjusting the level of confidence based on someone's demonstrated capacity for loyalty under pressure. Some people earned complete trust through consistent reliability across all circumstances. Others proved trustworthy in specific contexts, but not others. The art was matching your level of vulnerability to their proven level of reliability. Strategic forgiveness also required honest assessment of your own role in past betrayals. Sometimes what I had experienced as betrayal was actually the predictable result of my own poor judgment in trusting someone beyond their capacity for loyalty. Learning to take responsibility for my own mistakes in evaluation made me both more discerning and more compassionate in future relationships. I discovered that some relationships could be repaired while others had to be abandoned entirely. The determining factor wasn't the severity of the original betrayal, but the betrayer's capacity for genuine change. Those who had learned from their mistakes and developed stronger character could become trustworthy again. Those who remained fundamentally unchanged would repeat their patterns given similar circumstances. The most valuable insight was understanding that forgiveness serves the forgiver more than the forgiver, more than the forgiven. Carrying resentment and suspicion poisoned my ability to form new relationships and recognize authentic trustworthiness when it appeared. Strategic forgiveness meant letting go of past hurts, not because they didn't matter, but because holding on to them prevented me from moving forward effectively. However, forgiveness without boundaries enabled repeated betrayal. The goal wasn't to become naive again, but to become wise enough to distinguish between those who deserved second chances and those who had forfeited them permanently. Some bridges, once burned, should remain ashes, not from inability to forgive, but from wisdom about the futility of rebuilding relationships with fundamentally unreliable people. My observations of powerful women in Renaissance Italy taught me crucial lessons about how gender dynamics affected trust calculations. The portraits of influential women in my mental gallery included figures like Caterina Sforza, Lucretia Borgia, and Isabella d'Este, women who navigated trust and betrayal in a world that offered them fewer protections and different opportunities than their male counterparts. Caterina Sforza, the fierce defender of Forok and Amula, showed me how women in positions of power had to be even more strategic about trust than men. She couldn't rely on physical strength or traditional male networks, so she developed extraordinary skills in reading people's motivations and building alliances based on mutual benefit rather than sentiment. Her survival depended on distinguishing between those who supported her capabilities and those who merely sought to use her position for their own advancement. I learned that women often became more sophisticated judges of character than men because their survival frequently depended on accurately assessing others' intentions. They couldn't afford the luxury of naive trust that men sometimes indulged. This made many of them valuable advisors when it came to evaluating potential allies and enemies. Lucretia Borgia's evolution from political pawn to capable leader demonstrated how women had to navigate the additional complexity of others' assumptions about their motives and capabilities. She was initially dismissed as merely a tool of her father's ambitions, but proved herself a skilled negotiator and administrator. This taught me that gender stereotypes often blinded people to women's actual abilities, both their strengths and their dangers. The different challenges women faced in building trust often made them more reliable allies once that trust was established. They understood the value of loyalty because they had fewer options for replacing broken relationships. A woman who chose to trust you had usually evaluated that decision more carefully than a man in a similar position. However, I also observed that some women used others' underestimation of them as a strategic advantage. They could gather information and build influence while being dismissed as harmless. This taught me never to underestimate anyone based on gender, age, or apparent powerlessness. Often the most dangerous opponents were those who appeared least threatening. Women's exclusion from formal power structures sometimes made them more creative and effective in informal influence networks. They built relationships based on personal connection, shared interests, and mutual support that often proved more durable than men's more transactional political alliances. I noticed that successful women often displayed a particular combination of apparent vulnerability and hidden strength that allowed them to gather allies while maintaining flexibility. They could appear to need protection while actually being quite capable of protecting themselves, creating relationships where others felt both useful and valued. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that the women who thrived in Renaissance politics were those who could maintain their essential humanity while developing strategic sophistication. They refused to let necessary caution destroy their capacity for genuine connection, finding ways to be both wise and warm in their relationships. These observations taught me that gender created different constraints and opportunities in trust relationships, but the fundamental principles remained. Constant reliability, honesty, and mutual benefit formed the foundation of worthwhile alliances. Regardless of the participant's gender, the later correspondence from my final years reveals how my approach to trust evolved as I aged, becoming neither more cynical nor more naive, but more discerning about when to invest emotional energy in relationships. Experience taught me that wisdom doesn't automatically follow from time lived, but from reflection on lessons learned through both success and failure. In my youth, I had trusted too quickly, assuming that shared interests or mutual attraction created reliable bonds. In middle age, political betrayals made me overly suspicious, seeing calculation in every gesture and self-interest in every offer of friendship. But in my later years, I developed what I came to think of as seasoned judgment, the ability to assess people accurately without losing my capacity for genuine connection. Age brought the realization that my early mistakes in trust often stemmed from my own inexperience rather than others' malicious intent. Young people naturally focus on immediate attraction and obvious compatibility, lacking the experience to recognize patterns that predict long-term reliability. I had trusted people based on how they made me feel rather than how they consistently behaved, mistaking charm for character and enthusiasm for commitment. My perspective on betrayal also shifted with age. What had once felt like personal attacks, I came to understand as people acting according to their nature and circumstances. This didn't excuse their actions, but it helped me respond more strategically rather than emotionally. The goal became protecting myself and those I cared about, rather than punishing those who had disappointed me. I discovered that experience can lead to either cynicism or wisdom, depending on how you process painful lessons. Cynicism assumes the worst about everyone and prevents you from recognizing genuine goodness when it appears. Wisdom learns from past mistakes while remaining open to future possibilities. It makes you more selective without making you bitter. One of my greatest regrets was realizing how often my own character flaws had contributed to relationship failures. In my eagerness to advance my career, I had sometimes prioritized political advantage over personal loyalty. In my intellectual pride, I had sometimes dismissed others' perspectives without adequate consideration. Age forced me to acknowledge that I hadn't always been the kind of friend I expected others to be. This self-awareness made me more compassionate in evaluating others' failures while also raising my standards for future relationships. I became more forgiving of human weakness while becoming less tolerant of fundamental character flaws. The difference was understanding which failures reflected circumstances and which revealed essential nature. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that the goal of accumulated wisdom should be enabling deeper rather than shallower relationships. The young person who trusts everyone and the old person who trusts no one are equally impoverished in their connections. True wisdom finds the middle path, remaining open to authentic relationship while developing the discernment to distinguish between those worthy of trust and those who would abuse it. My final years taught me that the capacity for trust, like physical strength, requires exercise to maintain. If you stop taking appropriate risks in relationships, you lose the ability to form meaningful connections. The challenge was taking smart risks rather than reckless ones, building on accumulated wisdom rather than ignoring it. The timeless principles codex I would write today synthesizes lessons from Renaissance Italy that apply directly to your contemporary world. While technology and social structures have changed dramatically, human nature remains remarkably consistent. The same patterns of loyalty and betrayal, authenticity and deception that I observed in Florence still govern relationships in your modern era. Social media has created new challenges for assessing authenticity that mirror the courtly performances I witnessed in Renaissance palaces. Just as nobles presented carefully crafted personas at formal gatherings while hiding their true intentions, people now curate online identities that may bear little resemblance to their actual character. The same principles I used to see through court facades apply to modern digital person as watch for consistency between someone's online presentation and their offline behavior. Those who constantly proclaim their virtues on social platforms while treating service workers rudely in person reveal the same disconnect I observed between public piety and private vice. Pay attention to how people handle disagreement online. Those who resort to personal attacks or block anyone who challenges them often display similar fragility in face-to-face relationships. Corporate culture represents the modern equivalent of Renaissance court politics, with similar dynamics of alliance, ambition, and betrayal. The colleague who takes credit for your ideas while expressing concern for your career advancement employs the same tactics used by courtiers seeking favor with princes. The manager who speaks about team collaboration while hoarding information and opportunities demonstrates the timeless pattern of leaders who serve themselves while claiming to serve others. Apply my proximity test to workplace relationships. How people behave when they think advancement is possible versus when they believe they have nothing to gain from you. Those whose treatment of you changes based on your perceived usefulness reveal character patterns that will govern all their professional relationships. In dating and romantic relationships, the fundamental challenge remains distinguishing between genuine interest and strategic performance. Modern dating apps and social conventions may change the context, but the underlying patterns remain constant. Someone who love bombs you with excessive attention early in the relationship often follows the same trajectory as courtiers who flattered. Prince's intense initial investment, followed by manipulation. Once they believe they have secured your commitment, look for the modern equivalents of the character tests I developed. How do they treat people who cannot benefit them? How do they speak about former friends and romantic partners? Do their actions align with their stated values when maintaining that alignment becomes costly or inconvenient? Family relationships still require the same balance between vulnerability and wisdom that I learned in my own domestic life. The relative who only contacts you when they need money operates by the same principles as Renaissance allies who appeared only when they required military support. Conversely, family members who maintain contact during good times and offer support during difficulties demonstrate the reliability that transcends changing circumstances. Modern communities, whether online or offline, follow the same patterns I observed in Renaissance intellectual circles. Some groups unite around shared values and maintain those bonds despite individual differences, while others fragment when temporary interests no longer align. The capacity to disagree without becoming enemies, to challenge ideas without attacking persons, remains as rare and valuable today as it was in my era. The principles of strategic forgiveness apply equally to contemporary relationship challenges. The friend who betrays your confidence, the business partner who violates agreements, the family member who exploits your generosity require the same careful evaluation of whether reconciliation serves wisdom or enables further harm. Perhaps most importantly, the modern world's pace and complexity make discernment even more crucial than in my time. You encounter far more people and face far more relationship decisions than Renaissance individuals ever did. This makes it essential to develop efficient methods for recognizing character patterns quickly while remaining open to authentic connection when it appears. As I reflect on a lifetime spent studying the intricate dance between trust and survival, my deathbed reflections reveal both profound satisfaction and lingering regrets about the relationships that shaped my understanding of human nature. What I want most to be remembered for is not my political theories or diplomatic achievements, but my attempt to help people navigate the eternal challenge of loving wisely in a world where love can be weaponized against the loving. The most important lesson I learned too late was that strategic thinking and genuine care are not contradictory forces. They are complementary wisdom. You can love someone deeply while remaining clear-eyed about their limitations. You can extend trust gradually while maintaining open hearts. The goal is not to become invulnerable, but to become discriminating enough that your vulnerability serves authentic connection rather than exploitation. If I could live my life again, I would spend less time protecting myself from potential betrayal and more time learning to recognize genuine goodness when it appeared. My political experiences taught me to see danger everywhere, sometimes blinding me to opportunities for meaningful connection, while caution served me well in government. Excessive suspicion impoverished my personal relationships. I would also place greater emphasis on becoming worthy of others' trust rather than focusing so intensely on evaluating their worthiness of mine. The quality of relationships you attract depends largely on the quality of character you develop. Those who are consistently reliable tend to surround themselves with other reliable people, while those who operate through manipulation often find themselves in networks of mutual deception. My challenge to you is this: learn to trust wisely, but never stop trusting entirely. The world needs people who can navigate relationships with both intelligence and warmth, who can distinguish between naivety and generosity, between appropriate caution and paralyzing suspicion. Your task is to become sophisticated enough to recognize deception without becoming cynical enough to assume universal bad faith. Develop what I call graduated trust. Begin new relationships with appropriate reserves while remaining genuinely open to deepening connection based on demonstrated reliability. Trust people with small things first, then gradually increase your vulnerability as they prove themselves worthy of greater confidence. This protects you from devastating betrayals, while preserving your capacity for meaningful relationships. Remember that every relationship involves risk, and the goal is not to eliminate that risk, but to take intelligent risks with people who have earned them. Complete security in relationships is an illusion that prevents authentic connection. The alternative to trusting wisely is not trusting safely, is not trusting at all, which impoverishes your humanity. Pay attention to patterns rather than isolated incidents when evaluating character. Good people sometimes make poor decisions under pressure, while bad people sometimes act kindly when it serves their interests. Look for consistency over time and across different circumstances too. Understand someone's essential nature. Build trustworthy communities by modeling the reliability you seek in others. Be the friend who remembers birthdays and shows up during crises. Keep confidences even when revealing them would advantage you. Honor commitments even when circumstances make them inconvenient. Your consistent trustworthiness will attract others who share those values. The legacy I hope to leave is not a cynical view of human nature, but a realistic one that enhances rather than diminishes your capacity for authentic relationship. I want to be remembered as someone who helped people love more wisely rather than less completely, who taught discernment in service of deeper rather than shallower connections. In your modern world, where relationships are often superficial and temporary, the ability to form deep, lasting bonds becomes even more precious. Use the wisdom of ages to become someone others can trust completely, while developing the judgment to extend such trust only to those who deserve it. Trust, ultimately, is both the greatest risk and the greatest reward of human existence. Those who never take that risk remain safe, but alone. Those who take it indiscriminately often suffer devastating betrayals. But those who learn to trust wisely, gradually, appropriately, with people who have earned such confidence discover the profound joy of authentic, human connection that makes all the dangers worthwhile. My final encouragement is this: be brave enough to remain open to trust, wise enough to be selective about whom you trust, and committed enough to become the kind of person others can trust in return. The future of genuine human connection depends on people like you who refuse to let past betrayals destroy your capacity for future love.